I'm talking about quilt insulation, sleeping bag insulation, and the temperature ratings. And as a good example on some stuff you should watch out for, he's a Labrador, so he's got really good insulation. He's in the for the cold water, retrieving the ducts and everything. But keep in mind, if your insulation has a hole in it, you could get cold. So in this video, I'm going to try to help you to get the most out of your money and make the best decisions if you're planning on buying a quilt, sleeping bag, or an underquilt. The information applies to all three of them, but try to make sure you get what you're paying for when you're purchasing one of them. None of those things are cheap. You're looking easily $200 to $500 depending on what you buy, and you work hard for your money. So let's try to get the most of it. One thing I want to say before I forget, because I know I will forget it, with underquilts. Some underquilt manufacturers will offer a standard width top quilt and a wide top quilt. So where that comes into play is you're inside your hammock, your hammock's shaped like this, and you're laying in there, and the underquilt kind of wraps around up on each side of you when you're laying down inside of there. So the top quilts for a hammock can be narrower because they don't need to wrap down around you down to the ground or whatever. So some hammock quilt manufacturers, they will offer their top quilt in a standard width and a wide width. So take a look at that. Check out the widths on what the different companies are offering and everything, because if you're somebody like me that sometimes I'll sleep in a hammock, sometimes I'll sleep on the ground, so if I don't want to buy one quilt for this and one quilt for that, I wanted one thing to be able to cover everything. And even if you only hammock camp, you need to be prepared to go to ground, because not every situation is perfect. You could end up having something on your hammock fell, or a lot of people get out there and they realize they forgot their suspension for their hammocks or something, or you could just end up in an area that is just not suitable to hang a hammock and stuff. So being prepared for that, that's something to take into consideration, the width of a top quilt. If it's a hammock top quilt, keep that in mind. A regular quilt for people sleeping on the ground, that's going to be wider, so it can kind of go underneath them a little bit and down on their sides, and that will work fine in a hammock. You'll just have a little bit extra material there. So the main things I want to point out with are the temperature ratings on your I'm going to say quilt, or I'm going to say bag. I'm not going to, and it applies to all these things: quilts, sleeping bags, under quilts, top quilts. It all applies to that. I'm just not going to say that every single time. So years ago, there wasn't any standard. A company could make a bag and decide, okay, it's rated to 20 degrees, and you just had to take their word for it, and 9 times out of 10 it wasn't. So now there's different standards. There's the EN standard and the EU standard. There's a number behind it, like EN 135, 7, whatever, and there's actually 2 numbers for the EN standards. You could take a dive down that rabbit hole if you want to. Just Google, you'll find the information for it. But what it came down to is, for the most part, so on a quilt or bag that is down, the stitching that you see on top doesn't go through the top layer and bottom layer, because if it did, everywhere it was stitched, your insulation would be compressed. There's fabric at every row of stitching. There's another piece of fabric that runs vertical, and it's sewn down along the bottom edge, and it's sewn along the top piece of material. And those baffles, usually out of a mesh material, will keep the down from just shifting, falling all the way down to the bottom of your bag or whatever. They're make like chambers. So there's a kind of a standard formula. Like if you want to make a 20-degree bag, then your baffles are this big and have X amount of down in them, and then if you wanted to make a colder or warmer rated sleeping bag, then there's the formula adjusts for that, and that's kind of how they come up with the temperature ratings for that kind of standardized thing. The thing that a lot of people mess up on when they order quilts, in my opinion, I guess I can't really say they mess up on it. It's something that you need to be aware of, and then you can make your decision based on that. I just want you to be able to make an informed decision when you're spending that kind of money. So most companies, I sat and looked at the 4 biggest companies that make quilts that you see on YouTube all the time. Usually the videos on YouTube, people are out backpacking and everything, and a lot of emphasis is put on lightweight, ultralight, and all that kind of stuff. So I looked at those, and there is not information on whether those temperature ratings is lower limit and or comfort rating. And the difference between those is based on a standardization. A comfort rating is for somebody laying just flat, stretched out, and they can sleep like that down to that rated temperature and be comfortable. The lower limit rating is, it says that if it's a person kind of laying curled up, they can be warm. And most companies, and the difference is usually 10 to 15 degrees. The lower limit, if it's a 30-degree bag that's comfort rated at 30 degrees versus a bag that's 30 degrees that's rated at lower limits, that there's usually like a 10 to 15 degree difference in that. Meaning, if you're somebody that wants a comfort rated bag at 30 degrees, it would actually, a 30-degree lower limit bag would actually only rate you to like 45 degrees if you wanted the comfort rating. So most of the companies don't, it should say, if I had a company and I was making quilts and sleeping bags and stuff like that, it would say right there with that particular quilt, the description, the weight, the color options, all that kind of stuff, and it would also say this temperature rating is a comfort rating or a lower limit rating. I would be very clear on that. And I saw one of the companies, I'm going to name them, was Underground Quilts. They, on one of their quilts, it did say comfort rated, but on the rest of them, it didn't. So looking at it, somebody just randomly looking at your site thinking about ordering a quilt, it's not clear, is that the only quilt that's comfort rated, or are they all comfort rated? And you don't want to make that mistake and assume they are. I wish it would be more clear. The only reason I named that company is at least they did have one that actually said whether it was comfort or lower limit. So it's the biggest thing to keep in mind is that most of the gear that people do sell, if you do some research, one thing I've found is looking on a site, I couldn't find that on that website, that company's website, whether they use lower limit or comfort rating, but I was able to type in the name of the company and then temperature rating, and then it sent me to another site that had some information saying that they use lower limit. So like I said, I would rather, if I owned a company, it would be black and white, clear for anybody to see. So do I think the companies are being deceitful and dishonest by not putting that information up there? I'm sure there's probably at least one company that's just blatantly doing it just to be deceptive. But for the most part, I'm going to say no. But I do think that they might use that to their advantage. And what I mean by that is if you had a comfort rated bag at 30 degrees and a lower limit rated bag at 30 degrees. There's a 10 to 15 degree actual difference in that. And this 30 degree comfort rating bag was 20 ounces. I'm just making up numbers, 20 ounces. And the lower limit bag was only 16 ounces. All those people that push for the lightest gear and all that kind of stuff, people would be more tempted to buy this bag because it's 4 ounces lighter. So one thing to keep in mind with that is if you have to wear clothing to stay warm in the bag and you saved 4 ounces, but you're wearing 8 ounces of clothing, and especially if you're taking a dedicated sleepwear set, a base layer or whatever to sleep in, if you saved 4 ounces, but your clothing that you're carrying to sleep in weighs 8 ounces, did you really save any weight? Plus the extra bulk of that clothing, are you really saving anything? If you choose to do that, that's great. I just want you to be informed that that's what you're doing. So I think some people use it for their advantage because, somebody buying and they're just looking for the lightest bag. Hey, I'll get that one. And they don't really understand it's a lower limit rated bag. They just see it's cheaper. Hey, this company's got a 30 degree bag. This company's got a 30 degree bag. This one's lighter. So I'm going to get that one. Even though they're not the same bag, you're comparing apples to oranges with the comfort rating and a lower limit rating. Also money. Takes less insulation to get a 30 degree lower limit bag than it does a comfort bag. So this bag is lighter and cheaper. So heck yeah, let's get that bag. They're both 30 degree bags. Not really. And the reason a lot of companies use the lower limit when they're asked about it is because they say men are typically warmer sleepers. So most men are going to prefer the lower limit rated bag. Keep in mind, when they tested in the EN standards, it was a woman. I didn't say that earlier, but it's a woman laying flat, stretched out, and she could be comfortable sleeping like that at that rating. For the lower limit, it was a man curled up to be able to stay warm. So it's not the same, if they're saying a lower limit, well, because men sleep warmer, but then that rating is you're having men that sleep warmer having to be curled up to stay warm, So and most companies don't make specific bags for women. So, and I did see one of the companies said that all their stuff is lower limit. I had to do some research off of their site, but it said all the stuff is lower limit unless it's something specifically for women. But they didn't sell any of the sleeping bags or quilts specifically for women, so everything was lower limits. So I just keep that stuff in mind when you're buying sleeping bags and quilts and all that kind of stuff. You need to get the most for your money. If hey, with this bag it's a little bit lighter and it's a little bit cheaper, and I'm okay. I see that, I know that it's rated as a lower limit, and I know that I'm going to have to sleep kind of curled up a little bit to do that, but it's worth it to me to save the money and the weight. Cool, that is great. You do whatever works for you. I just think that I think that information should be made clearly on the sites on what you're looking for. You have to spend too much time trying to dig around to try to find the information. And more importantly, most people don't even know that that's even a thing. They just think it's a 30 degree rated bag. That's it. Another thing to keep in mind if you're buying a quilt, I think I might have said it in another video, but I'll say it again really quickly. I try to get comfort rated stuff. Another thing, little side note, another thing, look at reviews. Try to find as many reviews, especially off the company's website, like Reddit or some other place, to try to find reviews to see what people that are actually using them say about it. But one thing that I try to do is when I'm buying a bag, I try to allow myself a buffer. I used to love camping in the cold. I used to just try to push myself each winter to see what, to try to beat my last year's cold temperature and get colder and colder and colder. And it was a big learning experience and everything. I learned a lot doing that, and I did it for many years. I don't like being cold anymore. I just don't like doing it. A lot of time, a lot of that is because most of the time I go out now, I'm by myself. So when you go out in the winter and you're sitting there, it gets dark at 4 o'clock, and you're just by yourself. It just it's just boring, and you're just sitting in the dark, and then you're cold, and it's not even worth it to me anymore to get out when it's really cold. So I always allow myself a buffer. Buying a quilt, sleeping bag, whatever. It's something I've always done. Used to, you had to, because there was no standardization, and it's just something I've carried on doing, is allow myself a 10-degree buffer. And what I mean by that is, if the coldest temperatures I want to go into now is 30 degrees, and and then I want to buy a new bag or quilt, I buy myself a 20-degree bag, maybe a 15, but at least a 20-degree bag. That way, if I'm going out in a comfort rated bag at 30 degrees, and then the forecast was going to be like 33 degrees, but then the forecast was wrong and it's actually 26 degrees. Well, now I'm dipping into that, starting to get a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit chilly and everything, having to curl up a little bit and all that kind of stuff to stay warm. So that just allows me that extra 10 degrees of leeway. So even if it did drop below 30 a little bit, I still have a comfort rated 20-degree bag, so I'm going to be okay. I've spent many nights, especially younger, and then of course in the military too, but I didn't have the right gear and all that kind of stuff, didn't have the money to do it. I was just trying to push it way beyond its limits, and many nights all curled up there in a ball trying to stay warm and everything, and doing different things to just try to stay warm. It all worked out. I learned a lot, but now as I'm getting older, to sleep all curled up like that, I wake up in the morning and my back's all sore. Even in a hammock, my back's all sore, my legs are cramped up and all that kind of stuff. I don't want to do that. So if I buy a bag, for me, I want it to be a comfort rated bag, 10 degrees below the temperature that I want, the lowest temperature I want to camp in. And that way I know I can be comfortable and I can get a good night's sleep. A lot of people, most people watching the videos are in the hammocks. We sleep in hammocks because they're so much more comfortable. But if you're laying there all curled up in the fetal position trying to stay warm, you're still not going to get a good night's sleep. You're still going to be stiff and sore when you wake up in the morning. So, but that applies to everybody. So just keep this stuff in mind. When you're looking, do your research. If you can't find any other information on, by searching a company's name or whatever, and then trying to find out what limits they're using, contact the company, ask them if they are using a lower limit, but you want a comfort rating, but you really want some piece of gear from that company. Whatever your comfort rating bag you were looking for, if it's a 30-degree bag, then I would definitely get if they're using lower limits, I would definitely get something 10 to 15 degrees below that. Downside to that, though, with the lower limit bags, now to get my 10-degree buffer, if I wanted a 30-degree comfort rating bag, I had to settle for a 20-degree lower limit bag. Well, now I've still got an equivalent to a 30-degree comfort rated bag, but now I don't have that buffer. So now I'm going to have to get a 10-degree lower limit rated bag to equal up to a 20-degree comfort rated bag, so I can have my 10-degree buffer for my 30-degree comfort rated bag. See what I mean? I just wish the companies had the information right there on their websites. Why can't they put it on there? I don't want to say that they are deliberately trying to deceive you, but there's no reason why they can't put that information on there. And looking at a lot of the Comfort rating, frequently asked questions on websites, trying to find the information. Sometimes when you look, it's just really vague information. And I know on one of the websites it said, we base our ratings based on customers' feedback and all that kind of stuff. It's not a clear answer. Why can't they made the standards. They standardized the industry. They're starting to do it with inflatable mattresses and all that kind of stuff with the R values. They made the standard for us, for the people, the consumers that are buying the stuff, so that companies just can't make up numbers and say, oh yeah, it's this, when it's really not. But then companies are bypassing that standard and just, oh yeah, we just base it on our customers reviews and what their opinions are and all that kind of stuff. No, if you made a standard, if the industry is using a standard, then stick to that standard. This, and the standard is pretty clear. Basically, the formula, if you want a bag that's comfort rated, you have baffles this size and this much insulation, this much loft. And if you want a lower limit bag within that standards, then you have this much insulation and loft and everything. And companies are bypassing that and skirting around it and everything. But then when you're questioned, oh no, it's standardized and we're doing this and that. Really, if you're truly following the standards and truly trying to do what is best for the consumer, put that stuff on black and white on your website, on the products, on each one of the products that you're selling, what it is, what the standard is, and let the people make the best decision they can. If they're spending their hard-earned money on your products, make sure they're getting what they're paying for. If they choose, if they're a warmer sleeper, I'm a cold sleeper, I got no body fat. But if they're a warm sleeper and they don't want that they want the lower limit, cool, at least they will know they're getting what they're wanting. So I just think, just do your research when you're spending the money. It sucks that you have to research it to try to find information to get it. Should be black and white. Another thing to keep in mind with the temperature variations, especially most companies are selling lower limit stuff, which is 10 to 15 degrees below the comfort rating. Keep in mind, if you're doing multiple day trips, then this could be really important, because over time, if you're doing like a 5-day trip, the bag, especially with down, it's going to get moisture in it. It's going to get condensation. It's going to get moisture from the air, all this other kind of stuff. It's going to get condensation and moisture on the down. Even with the good fabrics that are shedding it, they can kind of minimize it and all that kind of stuff. But still, especially from your body, the moisture, the condensation, it's coming up through the bag, hopefully making it all the way through the bag before it starts to turn back into water and everything. But some of that is getting in your bag. And you start out with this much insulation on day 1, and then day 2, and then day 3, and day 4. So if you're in a bag that's already rated at lower limits for that temperature rating, day 1 or night 1, night 2 might be okay. Night 3, you might start curling up in a little bit tighter ball. Night 4, night 5, you're going to be more and more miserable, because the bag is not as effective. And the reason that is, typically, if you're camping multiple nights, you don't have a chance to properly dry out your bag, to let it loft back out and everything again, to get rid of any of that moisture that's in the bag. You don't typically have a chance to do that. There are some exceptions, but a lot of times it's the quality of the bag is going to suffer throughout the nights until you can get back home, properly dry it and everything. So keep that in mind too. If you get in that situation, you're already in a bag that's at the lower limit for that temperature, and then that happens, if you had a comfort rated bag and you were a little bit warm that first night or two, you could pull the covers off, the quilt off a little bit, and ventilate a little bit so you can cool down. And by that third, fourth, fifth night, you might be wishing that was a real comfort rated bag for that temperature, because then even as even as it's losing its insulation ability, it's still above that lower limit rated bag. So keep that in mind when you're buying the bags, choosing the best option for you. And the last thing to keep in mind when you're buying stuff, especially if you're camping for multiple days or will be camping in the future for multiple days, as far as the temperature rating, comfort rating versus lower limit rating, they the fact that other things apply to whether you get cold or warm. Of course, the weather, the wind, all that kind of stuff, makes a big difference. The moisture in the air makes a difference, everything. But more importantly, in this situation, the your physical condition, the amount of hydration or dehydration, the nutrition, all that kind of stuff will affect how warm or cold you sleep at night and everything. And if you're staying out multiple days, your body is getting, especially if you're backpacking, your body is getting more and more fatigued and everything and wore down. You're kind of wearing down your body. Are you staying hydrated during the day when you're out walking 10, 15, 20 miles a day? Maybe not. Chances are you're eating crap, just junk food and stuff for the energy and everything. So your body's not running at 100%. And every day your body is going to be affected a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. So, and then that can affect how warm or cold you are when you sleep. So that's something else to keep in mind when you're deciding, should I get a bag that's rated at a comfort rating or a lower limit rating? Your body, if you're doing multiple day trips, it's not going to be running 100%. And as those days go on, you might be wishing you had that comfort rating bag. So hope this helps. Hope I would try not to go very deep into specifics. I just want to give some information, and you can go down the rabbit hole if you want to. But just, it's something to look at if you're going to be spending $200, $300, $400, $500 on a bag, quilt, under quilt, top quilt, whatever. Just make sure you get your money's worth from them. And there's a lot of good companies out there to buy from. I'm not going to recommend one over the other. Just do your research.